Welcome to Drum Talk, and today's Drum Talk is going to be a very special one because today's Drum Talk is going to be about one of my biggest drumming influences, and it's going to be about Jeff Porcaro. Now, Jeff Porcaro passed away in August of 1992, and the day he passed away, I'll never forget it because a good friend of mine, Rich Sullivan, called me up and he said, "Did you hear Jeff passed?" And Jeff was at the height of his career at that point in time. Besides doing the Toto albums and all the other studio work he's done, which is an incredible list of people he's played with and songs he's played on, in 1992, he was just getting ready to do some things, possibly live with Bruce Springsteen. He had just done Bruce Springsteen's album, and he'd also done Dire Straits' last album, the one with Calling Elvis on it. And he shared the drumming duties with Manu Katché. And Jeff was in his prime, 40 years old, young guy. But he had done so much in that short season of his life. Jeff's career started in the early 70s. He left high school to go out on the road with Sonny and Cher. If you know anything about the Porcaro brothers, and by the way, there's books written on this stuff, and I'm just somebody that's been watching them from afar for a long time. The Porcaro brothers come from a lineage of Joe Porcaro, which was their dad, and Joe's been a session percussionist in Hollywood forever and drummer, extraordinary teacher. And Jeff has been an influence to many, many drummers throughout the world. So this drumming influence video has to do with the fact I just did a Toto cover, the first one I've done, and I really felt like now was a good time to kind of share some of my thoughts and memories of Jeff. My first exposure to understanding Jeff was probably, I didn't even realize it, because you listen to songs from Seals and Croft, Melissa Manchester, Barbra Streisand. I mean, these were songs that were out there in the 70s and early 80s, and didn't even realize Jeff played on a lot of those albums. The Bee Gees. He played with so many artists, it's hard to even understand the scope of what he's done. But when I first heard about Jeff, I was reading Modern Drummer. And Modern Drummer, I picked up my first issue of Modern Drummer in January of 1977. It had Tony Williams on the cover. It was the beginning of year 2 for Modern Drummer. And the third issue of the year, because they were quarterly at the time, was an issue with Ed Shaughnessy on the cover. And it was Son and Father, Joe and Jeff Porcaro. And that was the first time I read anything on Jeff Porcaro and realized he'd played on some pretty heavy stuff. He'd already done Katy Lied with Steely Dan. He'd been out on the road with Sonny and Cher. He'd been out on the road with Seals and Croft, and he was starting his band Toto. This was before Toto really hit. And he was doing a lot of session work in Los Angeles. Jeff was already a first call session drummer at that point in time. I would go on to find many albums that he played on. Some of the significant ones for me, besides the Toto work, which is significant in itself because Toto 4 was a Grammy Award-winning record with the song Rosanna on it, and this was huge for them. But he'd been on many, many albums besides that. Okay, when I first heard Katy Lied, I mean Dr. Wu. There's so many songs. Gold Teeth Part 2, I guess it was called. Gold Teeth Part 2. It was like a jazz tune. And Jeff played his butt off on these songs. So Jeff was a major, major influence for me. And his style is seen in so many different ways. I've tipped my hat to him in different videos. I've showed the groove to I Keep Forgetting in the hi-hat video. My interpretation of the Purdy Shuffle comes from Jeff for sure. By the way, Rosanna is a hard tune to play. It's not an easy song. I've watched a whole bunch of covers from some of the great drummers out there on YouTube. I tip my hat to all you guys that are really nailing it. I mean, that session where they recorded that song was played with the band together in a room. the way they used to make music. It wasn't on the grid, but it was a perfect groove for that day and that band. And he sat in it just perfectly. Him and David Hungate were like married together. And David Hungate was the bass player of Toto at the time. So it's a major feat and a major, he was a major player. I think we lost him too soon. Some of his best work came out right at the time of his passing. Calling Elvis, if you ever listened to Dire Straits and the album Calling Elvis, with the song Calling Elvis on it, just to listen to the overdubs he did, the things he was doing with the splash cymbals, and the Pac is just amazing. Now, I would love to put some of these examples in this video, but as we all know, anything on YouTube you put up with a copyright on it, it's gonna just wreck the possibility of this video being used for anything for you. So I'm just gonna tell the stories, and I will maybe leave a few links in the description. But truthfully, Dire Straits' Calling Elvis is definitely a song you want to check out. You want to check out Katie Lied with Steely Dan. That is a awesome album that Jeff played on. All the Toto work. Okay. Some of my favorite songs are songs that you wouldn't think a drummer cares to listen to, but when I was coming up as a drummer in the late 70s, early 80s, I played a lot of weddings. And I played this song, the theme from Ice Castles, a billion times. My wife used to sing it in our band, but I played it with every band I was out there on the road with, playing with. And never realized that Jeff Porcaro played drums on the theme from Ice Castles, Melissa Manchester's hit. He also played on You Should Hear How They Talked About You, which is another one of her hits. He played it on Barbra Streisand's Kiss Me in the Rain, another beautiful ballad. I love ballads, and I'm a ballad drummer at heart. My steps to Jeff Porcaro come through Hal Blaine, listening to Hal Blaine playing with the Carpenters. Okay, another LA session guy that someday I will do a video on Hal. But Jeff fell into the footsteps of Hal Blaine and Jim Keltner. I love Jim Keltner's playing, and Jim Keltner comes from the Hal Blaine playing. So these guys are all connected. Jim Keltner, Hal Blaine, Russ Kunkel, Jeff Porcaro. And Jeff Porcaro birthed Carlos Vega and Vinnie Colaiuta. By the way, when Vinnie couldn't get a gig in Los Angeles, Jeff was giving him gigs. Jeff was passing Vinnie's name around because Vinnie played with Zappa, and Vinnie was known for playing outside. Nobody knew how great a player Vinnie could be except Jeff, and Jeff started passing his name around town. And Jeff was known to pass people's names around town. There's many stories that I've heard from the likes of Mike Baird, where Jeff's on a session, he goes, this isn't my tune, why don't you call Mike Baird up? Or why don't you call Jim Keltner up? Or why don't you call Carlos Vega up? Or why don't you call Vinnie up on these tunes? Jeff was giving away work when he thought the songs didn't fit him, yet he could play anything. Jeff played on the Stan Getz album. There's a playlist on Spotify, and if I can drag that link in for those of you that have paid Spotify, this playlist is open. There's over 1,000 Jeff songs on it. Everything from Michael McDonald to Earth, Wind, and Fire he played with. He played with Chicago. He replaced Danny Surfin on Stay the Night with Chicago. Even Danny acknowledges that in his book, Street Player. Jeff was a player's player, and we lost him too early in life. So anyhow, my Rosanna cover is to Jeff. I'm going to put me playing Rosanna, but you're not going to hear Rosanna on it on the front end and the back end of this video a little bit. And I'm going to give you my best moments of me playing Rosanna, because trust me, that was a hard song to play. Had a lot of fun doing it, but it was a hard song to play. So this short video talking about my influences, Jeff Porcaro. Now, one other thing I want to say. My kit today is set up for Jeff, all right? Jeff is the one who made the 10-inch tom off to the over the hi-hat popular. He really popularized it. Steve Gadd put the 10-inch tom on a drum kit. Prior to Steve Gadd, I don't know many guys that were using 10-inch toms unless they were concert toms. And then, of course, you had a 6 and an 8 and a 10 and a 12. and a 13 and a 14 and a 16 fiberglass toms. That was the Hal Blaine kit. Steve Gadd came along, got a set of pearl fiberglass toms and said, well, I like the 10 and I like the 12 and I like the 13 and the 14, or maybe the 14 and the 16, and he basically made a double-headed kit of pearl concert toms, fiberglass concert toms, with a Gretsch bass drum. Jeff Porcaro took that 10-inch tom that most guys would put right here, and he moved it up here. And whenever I see a kit set up in this manner, this is in tribute to Jeff. Jeff's gigging kit for the last bunch of years would be 10, 12, 13, and on the floor tom, it was either a 14 by 14 or a 16 by 16. They were pearl drums on the road, but everybody in LA knew that Jeff was playing Gretsch drums many, many times on many of those hit albums. Besides playing Ludwig drums, Camco drums, Slingerland drums, he was a drum guy. He loved drums. Snare drums could be anything. And one of Jeff's favorite snare drums was an old 1934 Radio King, Slingerland Radio King drum that was customized by Paul Jameson. Now, Paul Jameson was the drum tech to the Stars in the 80s, and Paul Jameson, along with Jeff Porcaro, developed the first pearl drum rack. It was called the Jeff Porcaro drum rack with the squared tubing, okay? And because it was squared, nothing moved on the Jeff Porcaro rack, unlike the Gibraltar racks and the DW racks and the Yamaha racks of the early days and the Tama racks with the round tubing, true tubing. The pearl rack was made of aluminum squared hollow tubing. And the pearl rack was a beautiful rack that all the pearls hardware worked on. And Jeff made that first rack. The first Porcaro rack was called the Porcaro drum rack. Jeff Porcaro drum rack, and it was made by Jeff with Paul Jameson, who was his drum tech. Paul Jameson made that 7x14 Radio King snare drum. By the way, in my snare drum video, I show you a picture of a DMR walnut 7x14 with the Radio King lugs on it. I was approximating my friend Scott's drum and Jeff Porcaro's. That solid shell drum. So I know he loved that solid shell sound, but you would also see him playing pearl piccolo drums. He played whatever drum fit the session that he was doing. He had a beautiful Brady 12-inch drum on one of the pictures I have of him playing Gretsch. Many studio sessions you would find him playing Gretsch drums in the studio, and he had a couple really beautiful Gretsch kits for the studio. So the other thing about this kit is I put up Paiste cymbals, okay, which I really love, and Jeff turned me on to big crash cymbals. I played a lot of light gigs when I was younger, and a lot of church gigs, and big cymbals overpowered things. But my first set of Sabians, I remember when I was playing my first set of Sabians, I had an 18-inch crash ride. It was called a sound-controlled crash, and it reminded me of Jeff Porcaro's sound, that big crash cymbal sound. Now, I've come over the last couple of years to start buying really big crash cymbals. This is a 20-inch giant beat. I have a 20-inch 505 crash. This is a 22-inch big beat, which could be a beautiful 22-inch crash if I want it to be. So this whole cymbal setup is set up in reference to Jeff. Now, it's not Jeff cymbals. Jeff played 2002s and 602s. And Jeff's ride cymbal a lot of times would be a 22-inch 602 ride, or a 20-inch 602 medium ride, or a 22-inch 2002 ride. And late in his career, he was playing the early Signature Series stuff. A friend of mine, Ed Clift, who used to be a Paiste ref, told me that he was playing the Paiste Signature Series stuff when it first came out. So he would have kept progressing with his cymbals over time. But if you look in this issue of Modern Drummer magazine, where the beginning of his article starts, you would think I had that all queued up, right? There's a picture of his Paiste cymbal setup in 1982. And what was it? Huge cymbals. Two 21-inch 2002 crashes, one 20-inch 2002 crash, one 19-inch 2002 crash, one 22-inch 2002 ride, one 22-inch 2002 China. He had an 8-inch 2002 bell and a pair of 14-inch 2002 heavy hi-hats. he liked the heavy hi-hats. He had a thing for the heavy hi-hats, no doubt about it. There's also he had a pair of Peisty 602 heavies, 13-inch, and I think he had a pair of 14-inch heavy hi-hats. So he liked that really chick sound, and his hi-hat playing was one of the things he was known for, especially the idea of getting that lope on the hi-hat, that tip, shank style playing, which he picked up. He would tell you he picked it up from James Gadsden and other R&B players. So Jeff's a hero, and I'm really happy to finally get to talk about Jeff in a video. Kit set up that way. Now, of course, my kick drum is a 14 by 20. He played an 18 by 22, a 14 by 22. 22 was his normal size, but he had 24s, he had 20s, he had 18s. Another thing he liked to play was a DW 5000 pedal with a strap. He had one of those. He also had one with a chain. He was an awesome player, and he came up in a time when drum equipment wasn't the best, and he was always using top of the line stuff, whatever the next best gear was. So anyhow, Jeff Porcaro, thank you for your inspiration to me and many other drummers, and I hope you guys get something out of it and enjoy this drum talk. Thanks for watching.